During my grandson's baby shower, my daughter raised her glass and smiled at her mother-in-law. I want to toast the woman who should have been my mother. She will always be the true and only grandmother to my child. I sat frozen as the elegant crowd in Evelyn Montgomery's pristine garden erupted in approving murmurs. My daughter Emily, whom I had raised alone since she was 24, had just publicly erased me from her life and her child's future. I placed my teacup on the saucer with careful precision, a lifetime of maintaining dignity in difficult moments guiding my movements. Across the garden, Evelyn's triumphant smile gleamed as she embraced Emily, her designer bracelet catching the afternoon sunlight as she stroked my daughter's pregnant belly proprietarily. For 8 years, I had watched Evelyn Montgomery attempt to pry Emily away from me with expensive gifts, backhanded compliments, and constant implications that I was somehow insufficient. I'd bitten my tongue when she, helpfully, corrected my table settings at Emily's engagement dinner and remained silent when she redecorated Emily and James's first home because Helen's taste is so traditional. Now, watching my daughter glow under Evelyn's approving gaze, I realized that silence had been my greatest mistake. I stood quietly, gathering my modest purse and the hand-knitted baby blanket I'd spent months creating. No one noticed as I slipped away from the celebration. Only James, my son-in-law, caught my eye from across the garden, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might follow me, but he remained rooted beside Emily, his gaze dropping away from mine, as if ashamed. I drove home in silence. My modest Cape Cod, where I'd raised Emily, stood in stark contrast to the Montgomery estate I'd just fled. Inside, I placed the baby blanket on my work table and stood motionless in my silent living room. The walls were lined with photographs, Emily's graduation, her wedding day, Richard in his professor's robes before cancer took him far too young. I didn't cry. Tears would come later, in the darkness of my bedroom where no one could witness this final maternal failure. Instead, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Martin, it's Helen Carter. I need you to send that package now. Yes, the one Richard prepared. It's time. After hanging up, I opened my husband's antique roll-top desk, the one Evelyn had once called charming in a vintage way, with that condescending smile. From the hidden compartment Richard had built, I removed a sealed envelope with my name written in his familiar handwriting. For Helen, to open only when the package has been delivered to Emily. I traced his handwriting with my fingertip, remembering the night he'd written this letter, just days before cancer claimed him. There are things Emily may need to know someday, he'd said, his voice already weakened. Things about the Montgomerys, about Evelyn. I've arranged it all with Martin. Promise me you'll use it if necessary. I had promised, though at the time I couldn't imagine ever needing to reveal whatever secrets my brilliant husband had discovered about the family our daughter was marrying into. Even when Evelyn had come to our home shortly after Richard's funeral, while Emily and James were still dating, and informed me with cold precision that Emily wasn't Montgomery material, I had kept silent about the package. Now, 8 years later, with my daughter's words still burning in my ears, I finally broke the seal on Richard's letter, my hands steady, despite the storm raging inside me. My dearest Helen, it began, if you're reading this, then Emily has finally forced your hand. I always hoped she would be strong enough to see through Evelyn's manipulations on her own, but I feared this day might come. By morning, I had read Richard's letter 3 times and made my decision. The package would arrive at Emily's door by noon. Whatever came next, the truth would finally be told. As dawn broke, I made my bed with hospital corners, dressed in my most flattering blouse, and applied makeup with extra care. The front door's brass knocker sounded precisely at 9 o'clock. When I opened it, James stood on my porch, his tall frame hunched, his eyes red-rimmed from what appeared to be a sleepless night. Helen, he said, his voice hoarse. We need to talk about what happened yesterday. I stepped aside to let him enter, noting the absence of his usual confidence. Emily doesn't know I'm here, he continued, perching awkwardly on the edge of my sofa, the same sofa where he had asked for my blessing to marry my daughter years ago. I assumed as much, I replied, my teacher's instinct to wait for the student to find their words taking over. He twisted his wedding band nervously. What she said yesterday, that wasn't Emily. Not the real Emily. Something's happening to her. Something I don't understand. Ever since we announced the pregnancy, it's like she's becoming someone else. Someone who sounds remarkably like your mother? I suggested gently. His flinch confirmed my suspicion. James, I said, settling into Richard's old armchair. There's something coming to your house today. A package from Richard's lawyer. Before you and Emily open it, I need you to answer one question honestly. He nodded, tension visible in his shoulders. Do you love my daughter for who she truly is? Not for who your mother wants her to be, but for Emily herself. Stubborn, compassionate, occasionally insecure Emily? Of course I do, he answered without hesitation. The sharp ring of his cell phone interrupted whatever else he might have said. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. It's my mother. Again. That's the 5th time this morning. You should answer it, I said, rising from my chair. She'll only keep calling. James stepped onto my porch to take his mother's call. Through the window, I watched his expression change from resignation to shock. When he returned inside, his face had hardened. My mother says you're planning to cause trouble, that Richard collected fabricated evidence against our family years ago, and you're going to use it to drive a wedge between Emily and me now that we're expecting a child. So Evelyn had somehow learned about the package. I shouldn't have been surprised. Her network of friends had eyes everywhere. And do you believe her? I asked quietly. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like Richard that my heart ached. I don't know what to believe anymore. Emily suddenly worships my mother after years of tolerating her at best. You're sending mysterious packages with evidence. My mother is practically hysterical on the phone. He looked at me pleadingly. Just tell me what's going on, Helen. I crossed to Richard's desk and retrieved the letter I had read through the night. I think it's better if you read this first. It's from Richard. As James read, his expression morphed from skepticism to disbelief to horror. Is this true? All of it? Every word, I confirmed. The package being delivered to your home today contains all the original documents Richard references, financial records, private investigator reports, photographs. Everything he collected after your mother visited us 8 years ago. James set the letter down carefully. My mother told me she went to welcome you to the family, that you were cold and unwelcoming. I almost laughed at the audacity of the lie. She came to inform me that Emily wasn't Montgomery material and that I should encourage her to end your relationship before things went too far. And you never told Emily? Or me? Emily had just lost her father. You made her happy. I sighed, the weight of years of silence suddenly heavy on my shoulders. I thought love would be enough, that if you truly loved each other, Evelyn's disapproval wouldn't matter. James stood abruptly, pacing my small living room. All these years, the constant comments about Emily's potential, the surprise redecorating of our first apartment, the insistence that Emily change careers to something more suitable for a Montgomery wife. I thought she was just being overbearing. I never imagined that it was a systematic campaign to either remake Emily into someone worthy of the Montgomery name or drive her away completely, I finished. Richard saw it immediately. He started collecting information after that first dinner at your parents' house, months before you proposed. James's phone rang again. Emily this time. He stared at it for a moment before answering. Hey, no, I just needed some air this morning. Went for a drive. What package? No, don't open it until I get there. Emily, please, just wait for me. I'll explain everything when I get home. He ended the call, his expression grim. It's been delivered. Emily says my mother is there and insisting they burn whatever it is without opening it. I felt a cold certainty settle over me. You need to go. Now, before Evelyn convinces her to destroy everything. James hesitated at my door. Helen, I'm so sorry. For all of it. For not seeing, for not stopping it. It's not your fault, I assured him. Evelyn has had decades to perfect her manipulations. You were raised in them, normalized to them. Just go to Emily. She needs you now. As his car pulled away, I returned to Richard's armchair and waited. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. The truth Richard had protected for years was finally free, for better or worse. 3 hours later, my phone rang. Emily's name flashed on the screen. I answered on the first ring, my heart in my throat. Emily? Her voice came through broken by tears. Mom, can you come over? Please? I need you. I'm on my way, I promised, already reaching for my car keys. I drove to Emily and James's home with my emotions carefully contained, the way I'd learned to do through decades of teaching restless teenagers. Their house, a colonial revival that Evelyn had helped them select in the right neighborhood, loomed ahead. I noticed Evelyn's silver Mercedes was gone, a promising sign. Before I could reach the front door, it swung open. Emily stood there, her face pale and blotchy from crying, her pregnancy making her seem somehow more vulnerable than I'd seen her in years. "Mom," she whispered, the single syllable carrying a weight of apology I hadn't expected. I closed the distance between us and opened my arms. She fell into them with a sob, clinging to me as she hadn't since the night her father died. "I'm so sorry," she kept repeating against my shoulder. "So sorry, Mom. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I stroked her hair, the same soothing gesture I'd used when she was small. "Shh, it's all right. We're going to be all right." James appeared in the doorway behind her, his face drawn with exhaustion. He nodded to me over Emily's shoulder, a silent confirmation that the package's contents had been reviewed and believed. Eventually, Emily's sobs subsided enough for us to move inside. The living room showed signs of recent conflict, scattered papers across the coffee table, a broken vase, and water stains on the pristine cream carpet. "Evelyn didn't take the revelations well," James explained. "When she couldn't convince Emily to burn the package unopened, she tried to destroy the documents herself." Emily pulled back from my embrace, wiping her eyes. "She called Dad a liar, said he'd fabricated everything because he was jealous of the Montgomery family's status. That you had manipulated him into creating false evidence because you couldn't accept that I'd found a better mother figure in her." "Where is she now?" I asked, taking a seat beside Emily. "I asked her to leave," James said, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "When that didn't work, I informed her that I would call the police and have her removed if she didn't go immediately." Emily reached for a folder on the coffee table and handed it to me. "We found the financial records showing how she's been embezzling from the Montgomery Institute, and the private investigator reports about her campaign to separate James and me in the early years of our relationship. But this," she pulled out a separate envelope, "this is what I need you to explain." Inside were photographs, old Polaroids from the early 1990s, when Richard and I were first married. They showed us with another couple at various social events, the four of us smiling, arms linked in clear friendship. "That's my father," James said quietly. "With your husband. They look like best friends." "They were," I confirmed, memories flooding back. "William Montgomery and Richard Carter, inseparable from their first day at Princeton until my mother got pregnant with me and forced my father to cut all ties with common friends who didn't meet her social standards," James finished bitterly. "Dad explained it all in his letter." Emily took my hand. "Why didn't you ever tell me that you and James's parents had history?" I sighed, the weight of decades of silence pressing down on me. "When you first introduced us to James, we had no idea he was William Montgomery's son. The James we met used his middle name, Alexander, and we'd lost touch with the Montgomerys decades before. It wasn't until that first dinner at their house that Richard recognized William. And my mother recognized you," James added. "That's why she behaved so strangely that night, kept steering the conversation away from how we met or any talk of college years." I nodded. After that dinner, Richard was concerned. He remembered how Evelyn had systematically cut William off from everyone who didn't meet her approval. He feared she might try the same tactics with you and Emily. "So he hired a private investigator," Emily said softly. "To protect me. To protect both of you," I corrected. Richard believed James was as much a victim of Evelyn's manipulations as William had been. He wanted to gather evidence in case it was ever needed. James paced the room, his agitation palpable. "My entire life has been a carefully constructed lie. The charities my mother championed, tax shelters, her guidance of my career, designed to keep me dependent on family money. Even my father's distance all these years, I thought he was just cold. But according to Richard's investigations, my mother systematically excluded him from family decisions, controlled all communication, even intercepted letters and emails. Your father was a good man," I said gently. "Weak in the face of Evelyn's domination, perhaps, but he loved you. Richard always believed that." Emily leaned forward, her expression troubled. "But Mom, why didn't you use any of this when I started pulling away from you? When Evelyn began suggesting I call her Mom instead of by her name? When she criticized everything from your house to your clothes to your career? You just took it for years." The question struck at the heart of the choice I'd made, the choice to remain silent despite Evelyn's growing influence over my daughter. I wanted you to be happy, Emily. You loved James. The Montgomery connections opened doors for your career. And I hesitated, then admitted the hardest truth. I thought you would see through her eventually, that the daughter Richard and I raised would recognize manipulation and falsehood without needing it pointed out. Emily flinched. You're saying this is my fault? That I should have known better? No, I said firmly. The fault lies entirely with Evelyn. She spent a lifetime perfecting her methods. What I regret is not giving you the tools to recognize what she was doing. Like the truth about the Montgomery Institute, James said, picking up a thick report. Emily's been doing their PR for over a year, believing she was helping underprivileged girls. According to Dad's investigation, less than 8% of donations actually fund scholarships. The rest flows back to Montgomery Holdings through shell companies. Emily's hand moved protectively to her pregnant belly. I promoted them to my entire professional network, convinced friends to donate, all for a fraud. Her voice broke, and when I confronted Evelyn with the evidence today, she laughed, said I was adorably naive to think charity was ever about helping others rather than tax benefits and social status. James knelt beside Emily, taking her hand. We have decisions to make, about the Institute fraud, about my family's company, about our child's future relationship with my mother. A sharp knock at the front door interrupted our conversation. James tensed visibly. If that's my mother again. I'll get it, I offered, rising from the sofa. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Evelyn Montgomery who stood on the threshold, but Martin Green, Richard's attorney and trusted friend, a man I hadn't seen in person since the reading of Richard's will 8 years ago. Helen, he greeted me warmly, though his expression remained serious. I see the package was delivered successfully. Yes, I confirmed, stepping aside to let him enter, though I didn't expect a personal follow-up. Richard's instructions were very specific, Martin explained, as I led him into the living room. If the package was ever delivered, I was to follow up in person within 24 hours to provide the final piece of documentation, something he didn't trust to courier services or regular mail. Emily and James stood as we entered, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and wariness. Mr. Green, Emily said, recognition dawning. You handled Dad's estate. Martin nodded, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. Among other matters, your father entrusted to me. He turned to James, extending his hand. You must be James Montgomery. Your father spoke highly of you during our meetings. James blinked in surprise. You knew my father? Recently? Up until his passing 3 years ago, Martin confirmed, opening his briefcase. William Montgomery was my client for the final 5 years of his life, ever since Richard Carter asked me to reach out to him privately, without Evelyn's knowledge. The revelation sent a visible shock through James. My father had a lawyer my mother didn't know about? For 5 years? William was more resourceful than anyone gave him credit for, Martin replied, removing a sealed envelope from his briefcase, especially in matters concerning his son's future happiness. He handed the envelope to James. This is from your father, to be delivered only after you've reviewed Richard Carter's evidence and chosen to stand with Emily rather than your mother. James stared at the envelope, his father's distinctive handwriting addressing it simply to my son. How could you know I'd choose Emily over my mother? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Martin smiled slightly. I didn't, but your father believed you would, given access to the full truth. He had great faith in the young man he'd raised, despite Evelyn's influence. As James carefully opened the letter, Emily moved to his side, her hand resting supportively on his shoulder. I stepped back, giving them space for what was clearly a deeply personal moment. James read in silence, his expression cycling through shock, grief, and finally a fierce determination. When he finished, he passed the letter wordlessly to Emily, who read it with tears streaming down her face. What does it say? I asked quietly when she'd finished. Emily looked up, her eyes shining with emotion. It's an apology, and a gift. She handed me the letter. You should read it too, Mom. It concerns all of us. William Montgomery's elegant script filled the page. My dear son, if you are reading this, then Richard Carter's final gift to our families has accomplished what I could not in life. It has revealed the truth about your mother's manipulations and given you the chance to break free from patterns I was too weak to resist. I loved your mother once for her beauty and ambition, But Evelyn's need for social perfection destroyed whatever genuine connection we might have built. By the time I recognized the toxic nature of her influence, you were already formed by it, and I feared losing you entirely if I opposed her directly. This was my greatest failure as a father, choosing the path of least resistance rather than fighting for your right to authentic relationships unfiltered through your mother's agenda. Richard Carter was the best friend I ever had, and I abandoned him when Evelyn demanded I sever ties with anyone she deemed socially unworthy. I regretted this cowardice every day of my life. When Richard reached out again in his final months, offering forgiveness I didn't deserve, I vowed to honor our friendship in the only way I could, by protecting the future happiness of our children. The trust fund you've been told was your grandfather's legacy is actually a joint creation. Funds I sequestered from Evelyn's control, combined with investments Richard made before his death. It becomes accessible upon the birth of your child or your 35th birthday, specifically to ensure you have the resources to resist Evelyn's financial leverage over your choices. Additionally, Martin Green holds the deed to property Richard and I purchased in our youth. Lakefront land in Vermont, where we once dreamed of building adjacent family cottages. I've left detailed architectural plans and sufficient funds in trust to construct these homes as we originally envisioned, should you and Emily wish to honor that long-ago dream. Most importantly, I've provided Martin with documentation of Evelyn's financial manipulations of the Montgomery businesses, including evidence of tax fraud and embezzlement from the so-called charitable foundation bearing our name. Use this information not for revenge, but for leverage to secure your independence from her influence. I failed to protect you from your mother's machinations during my lifetime. Let this letter and the resources it references serve as my final attempt to give you the freedom I never claimed for myself, the freedom to build a family based on genuine love rather than social calculation. Your mother will never change, James, but you still can. With love and hope for the grandchild I will never meet, your father, William Montgomery. I lowered the letter, understanding at last the full scope of what Richard and William had arranged in secret, a final act of friendship that transcended death, creating a path for their children to find what they themselves had lost. The property in Vermont, Emily said softly. The trust fund. They were creating an escape route, a way for us to be free of Evelyn's control. James nodded, his expression resolute. And my father included evidence of financial crimes as insurance, leverage to keep my mother at bay if she tried to interfere. What will you do? I asked, looking between them. Emily's hand found mine, squeezing it gently. First, we correct my terrible mistake from yesterday. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. Mom, I am so sorry for what I said at the shower. I don't know how I let Evelyn manipulate me into believing you were anything less than the amazing mother you've always been. Pregnancy hormones probably didn't help, I offered with a small smile, along with 8 years of subtle undermining. No excuses, Emily insisted. What I said was unforgivable. Nothing between a mother and child is truly unforgivable, I assured her, especially when outside forces have been working so hard to drive us apart. James cleared his throat. We need to decide about the Montgomery Institute fraud. If we expose it, the scandal will be enormous. The family name will be tarnished, but if we remain silent, we become complicit, Emily finished, her expression hardening. I won't build our child's future on a foundation of fraud and manipulation. Martin Green, who had remained respectfully silent during our family discussion, spoke up. If I may offer a suggestion, William anticipated this dilemma and outlined a possible solution in his confidential instructions to me. We all turned to him expectantly. The institute could be restructured under new management, yours perhaps, with full transparency and genuine charitable purpose. The evidence of past misdeeds would remain secured with me, unused unless Evelyn attempts to interfere with your family or regain control of the organization. Rehabilitation rather than exposure, I mused, giving Evelyn a face-saving option while removing her from any position of power. Exactly, Martin nodded. William believed it would be the most constructive solution, honoring the Montgomery legacy by transforming it rather than destroying it completely. James considered this, his expression thoughtful. It would protect innocent employees and scholarship recipients from collateral damage, and give my mother a chance to retreat gracefully rather than face public humiliation. More mercy than she's shown any of us, Emily observed. But perhaps that's the point, to be better than the patterns she established. As they discussed the practicalities of implementing such a plan, I found myself studying Emily's face, the determined set of her jaw so like Richard's, the compassionate eyes that could still see the humanity in a woman who had tried to destroy her relationship with her mother. When Martin finally departed, promising to prepare the necessary legal documents, the three of us sat in a moment of shared exhaustion and relief. The baby shower, Emily said suddenly. Everyone who was there, they all heard what I said about you, Mom. They all witnessed Evelyn's triumph. James nodded grimly. My mother's social circle. She'll have already cemented that narrative. Then we need to correct it just as publicly, Emily declared, a new determination in her voice. At the Institute's garden party next weekend, everyone who matters in Boston society will be there. It's the perfect opportunity to set things right. Evelyn won't take that well, I cautioned. A public correction would undermine her carefully cultivated image. Good, Emily said firmly. It's time someone did. As darkness fell, Emily insisted I stay in their guest room rather than drive home. Please, Mom. I've spent too many years pushing you away under Evelyn's influence. I don't want to be apart tonight. That simple request, the reversal of so many previous rejections, moved me more than any elaborate apology could have. As I settled into the guest room that had once been explicitly designated as Evelyn's room for when she visits the baby, I found myself reflecting on Richard's foresight. He had anticipated this day years before it arrived, had methodically created the mechanisms that would protect our daughter when his direct influence was gone. You were right, I whispered to his memory as I drifted toward sleep. She needed the truth, no matter how painful. Thank you for ensuring she would eventually receive it. In the darkness, I could almost imagine his voice responding. Truth is the foundation of everything worthwhile, Helen. I always trusted Emily would recognize it when it finally reached her. Morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains as I woke in Emily and James's guest room. For a moment, disorientation clouded my thoughts. Then yesterday's revelations came flooding back. The package, William's letter, Emily's tearful apology, the plans to confront Evelyn at the garden party. I dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes and made my way downstairs, following the scent of fresh coffee. In the kitchen, I found James already awake, intently studying documents spread across the counter. Good morning, he said, looking up with a tired smile. Coffee? I'm afraid I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage toast. Coffee would be wonderful, I replied, taking in his rumpled appearance. Did you sleep at all? Not much. He poured me a cup from the carafe. I've been going through Dad's evidence against Mother. The financial trail is extensive and damning. He gestured to the papers. The Montgomery Institute is essentially a shell. Almost all donations are redirected through a series of complex transactions that ultimately benefit Montgomery Holdings. I sipped my coffee, unsurprised yet still dismayed by the confirmation of Evelyn's fraud. And Emily has been unwittingly promoting this scheme. For over a year, James confirmed grimly, using her professional network, her reputation, all while believing she was helping underprivileged girls. His expression darkened. Mother knew exactly what she was doing, binding Emily to her through this charitable work, making her complicit without her knowledge. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Emily's arrival. She entered the kitchen in a soft robe, her pregnancy now prominently visible. Despite everything, the sight of my daughter carrying my grandchild sent a wave of joy through me. You're both up early, she observed, accepting the cup of tea James offered. Plotting the Montgomery Revolution? James managed a small smile. Something like that. I've been reviewing the Institute's financial records. And I've been thinking about the garden party, Emily said, sitting beside me at the counter. It needs to be perfect. A public correction that Evelyn can't dismiss or minimize. I covered her hand with mine. Emily, are you certain about this? A public confrontation will have lasting consequences. Evelyn won't forgive such a challenge to her social standing. I'm counting on it, Emily replied, a steely determination in her voice I hadn't seen in years. I want her to understand exactly what happens when you try to separate me from my real mother. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. James and Emily exchanged wary glances. Mother wouldn't come here, James said, though he didn't sound convinced. Not after yesterday. I'll get it, Emily volunteered, rising awkwardly with her pregnant belly. James and I followed her to the foyer, neither of us willing to let her face Evelyn alone if that's who waited on the doorstep. But when Emily opened the door, it wasn't Evelyn who stood there, but an elderly gentleman I'd never seen before. Tall despite a slight stoop, impeccably dressed, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that immediately reminded me of James. "Grandfather?" James said, surprise evident in his voice. "James, may I come in?" The old man's voice carried the refined accent of old Boston money, but his expression held none of Evelyn's cold calculation. "Of course," James replied, stepping aside. "You remember Emily, and this is her mother, Helen Carter." Harold Montgomery nodded politely to us both, his shrewd gaze taking in the scene, Emily's tear-stained face, the scattered documents still visible on the coffee table, my presence in the house so soon after the baby shower incident. "So it's happened at last," he said, settling himself carefully in an armchair. "Richard Carter's dead man switch has finally triggered." The casual reference to Richard's contingency plan left me momentarily speechless. Emily recovered first. "You knew about my father's evidence? About the trust fund? About all of it?" Harold nodded. "My dear, I helped set it up. William came to me after Richard's diagnosis, devastated that his oldest friend was dying and determined to honor their connection in some lasting way." James stared at his grandfather in disbelief. "You knew what Mother was doing? All these years?" "Of course I knew," Harold replied with surprising bluntness. "I made the grave error of introducing her to your father at that charity gala, watched her sink her claws into the Montgomery fortune, and observed as she systematically isolated William from everyone who didn't serve her social climbing agenda." His expression softened slightly, including his best friend, Richard Carter, the most brilliant mathematician I ever had the privilege of teaching. "You taught my husband?" I asked, finding my voice at last. Harold nodded. "Advanced calculus at Princeton. Richard and William were exceptional students, became inseparable despite coming from such different backgrounds. A shadow crossed his aristocratic features, until Evelyn decided the Carters weren't prestigious enough connections for the wife of a Montgomery. "Why are you here now?" James asked, the lawyer in him evident in his direct questioning. "Because Martin Green called me," Harold replied simply. "We've been waiting years for this moment, the breaking of Evelyn's spell over this family, the fulfillment of the promise William and I made to Richard before he died." "What promise?" Emily asked, leaning forward. "That if Evelyn ever went too far, if she ever caused irreparable damage to your relationship with your mother, as we feared she might, we would ensure the truth came out. That William's son and Richard's daughter would know the real history between our families, not the sanitized version Evelyn constructed." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope, handing it to James. "This contains the access codes to the family archives, records Evelyn doesn't know exist. Within them, you'll find the complete documentation of your grandmother's correspondence with Richard during his final years, William's private journals, and the original plans for the Vermont property." James accepted the envelope with evident wonder. "All this time, you and Dad were working against Mother's influence in secret?" "William lacked the courage to confront Evelyn directly," Harold acknowledged with a sad smile. "My son's greatest weakness was always his conflict avoidance, but he found other ways to resist, ensuring financial provisions she couldn't control, maintaining connections she thought severed, preserving truths she tried to bury." Harold turned to me, his gaze softening. "Helen, Richard spoke of you often in his letters to my wife. He was so proud of your strength as a mother, your dedication as a teacher. He feared Evelyn would eventually try to drive a wedge between you and Emily, as she had between William and his friends." "He was right," I admitted quietly, "though it took years longer than he anticipated." "Evelyn plays the long game," Harold agreed. "Always has. Plants seeds of doubt that take years to flower into full estrangement. It's what makes her so effective and so dangerous to family bonds." Emily's hand found mine, squeezing it tightly. "But she failed. We know the truth now." "Knowledge alone isn't enough," Harold cautioned. "Evelyn will adapt her strategy, position herself as the victim of a conspiracy, appeal to your compassion. She's remarkably skilled at turning confrontations to her advantage." "What would you suggest?" James asked his grandfather. Harold's eyes held a steely determination I hadn't expected in a man of his apparent age. "Clean breaks, new beginnings. Build what William and Richard envisioned in Vermont, a sanctuary beyond Evelyn's reach. Reform the Institute under your leadership." Most importantly, establish boundaries that cannot be crossed without consequences. He turned to Emily, his expression gentling. And mend what Evelyn broke between you and your mother. That relationship is the foundation upon which all else must be built, the connection Richard valued above all others. Emily's eyes filled with fresh tears. I said terrible things. At the baby shower. In front of everyone. Then make amends publicly, Harold suggested, with the same witnesses present. Evelyn choreographed your humiliation of Helen carefully. The audience, the timing, the setting. Reclaim that narrative on your own terms. James straightened. The garden party next weekend. Mother's annual charity event for the Institute. Everyone who attended the shower will be there, plus half of Boston society. Emily nodded. Perfect. Let Evelyn showcase her perfect family one last time before we reveal the transformation of the Institute and my public apology to Mom. Harold's approving smile revealed where James had inherited his strategic thinking. A fitting venue for the beginning of the Montgomery family's new chapter, and the Carter family's rightful place within it. We spent the next hour discussing details, the timing of Emily's statement, the legal framework for restructuring the Institute, how to handle the inevitable backlash from Evelyn. Harold's insights into his daughter-in-law's tactics were invaluable, born from decades of watching her maneuvers. She'll call Emily's emotional state into question, he warned. Blame pregnancy hormones, grief over her father, manipulation by Helen. She'll position herself as the concerned mother-in-law, only wanting what's best for her unborn grandchild. And when that fails, James asked, she'll attack, Harold said simply. First subtly, through her social network, then directly, threatening your position in Montgomery Holdings, your connections in Boston society, perhaps even your marriage. Emily's hand went protectively to her belly. She wouldn't go that far. Harold's expression was grave. My dear, she separated William from his closest friends, intercepted his correspondence, controlled his access to family finances, and systematically isolated him until he was entirely dependent on her approval. Never underestimate what Evelyn will do when her control is threatened. As if summoned by her name, James's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. Mother, she wants to meet for lunch today. Says we need to discuss yesterday's unfortunate misunderstanding. She's moving faster than I expected, Harold observed, already attempting damage control. What should I tell her? James asked, looking from his grandfather to Emily and me. Accept, Harold said decisively. But not alone. The three of you should go together. United front, no opportunity for her to isolate any of you. Emily's eyes widened. You want Mom to come too? After what happened at the shower? Especially after what happened at the shower, Harold confirmed. Show Evelyn immediately that her tactics have failed, that Helen has been fully reintegrated into your family circle. Nothing will unsettle her more than seeing the three of you together, aligned against her influence. The strategy was bold, confrontational, the opposite of how I'd handled Evelyn's manipulations for years. My instinct had always been to retreat, to avoid conflict, to hope that love would triumph naturally over Evelyn's machinations. But where had that approach led us? To Emily's devastating toast, to years of growing estrangement, to Evelyn's near-complete victory over our mother-daughter bond. I'll go, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. If Emily and James want me there, Emily reached for my hand. I do. It's time Evelyn understood that she can't separate us anymore. James nodded his agreement, already typing a response to his mother. I'll tell her we'll meet her at Rothman's at 1 o'clock. All three of us. Harold rose, leaning on his cane. Good. Remember, she'll try to create division, to identify the weakest link in your unity and exploit it. Don't let her isolate any of you, physically or emotionally. As he prepared to leave, he paused by my chair. Helen, Richard would be proud of you today. Standing your ground, reclaiming your daughter. It's what he hoped for when he created his contingency plan. The simple validation from this man who had known my husband in ways I hadn't, as a brilliant young mathematician, as a loyal friend to William, moved me deeply. Thank you for helping them preserve the truth, I said softly, when it would have been easier to look away. Harold's weathered hand briefly covered mine. Some debts can never be fully repaid. I failed to protect William from Evelyn's influence. I won't fail his son and Richard's daughter the same way. After he left, The three of us sat in thoughtful silence, absorbing the morning's revelations and steeling ourselves for the confrontation ahead. Emily was the first to speak. "I need to change," she said, glancing at the clock. "If we're going to face Evelyn, I want to look my best. No more playing into her helpless pregnant daughter narrative." As she headed upstairs, James turned to me. "Are you sure about this, Helen? Mother can be vicious when cornered." I thought of all the times I'd retreated to avoid Evelyn's subtle cruelties, all the small surrenders that had gradually yielded so much ground. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "It's time I stopped letting fear of conflict determine my relationship with my daughter. Richard tried to warn me about Evelyn from the beginning. I should have listened." James smiled, a genuine warmth replacing his lawyer's reserve. "Dad would have liked you, Helen. I wish you both could have known each other better." "So do I replied, imagining the friendship that might have been. Two intelligent, compassionate men united against Evelyn's manipulations. But perhaps we can still honor their vision, even if they didn't live to see it realized. I glanced toward the stairs where Emily had disappeared, starting with protecting their greatest legacy, the family they both valued above all else. Rothman's was Boston's temple to old money, dark wood paneling, discreet service, the kind of establishment where tables were inherited rather than reserved. As we entered the hushed dining room, heads turned subtly in our direction. My presence alongside Emily and James, just a day after the baby shower incident, was already causing ripples in Evelyn's carefully curated social pond. She was waiting at her usual table by the window, a queen holding court. Even at 64, Evelyn Montgomery commanded attention, her silver blonde hair expertly styled, her tailored suit the perfect blend of authority and elegance. Her smile froze momentarily when she saw me, a flicker of calculation crossing her features before her social mask slipped back into place. "Emily, darling, James." She rose to accept Emily's perfunctory cheek kiss, then turned to me with practiced graciousness. "Helen, what an unexpected surprise." "I invited Mom," Emily said firmly, taking the seat directly across from Evelyn, rather than the adjacent position her mother-in-law clearly expected. "After all, we're discussing family matters." James seated me beside Emily, then took the chair next to his mother, completing our strategic positioning. Evelyn was now facing a united front rather than presiding at the head of the table as she'd undoubtedly planned. "How thoughtful," Evelyn replied, her voice honeyed with false warmth. Though I had hoped for a quiet mother-son lunch to discuss yesterday's unfortunate misunderstanding. "There was no misunderstanding," James said quietly as the waiter poured water. "The documents speak for themselves, Mother." Evelyn waved dismissively. "Ancient history and accounting technicalities wildly misinterpreted by your father. William was never comfortable with the complexities of modern charitable finance." "Tax fraud isn't a technicality," Emily countered, her voice low but firm. "Neither is embezzlement from a supposed educational foundation." Evelyn's eyes hardened briefly before she softened her expression into maternal concern. "Emily, darling, pregnancy can make one so emotionally vulnerable. These hormonal fluctuations, combined with Helen's obvious influence," she reached across to pat Emily's hand. "I completely understand why you might temporarily be confused by these allegations." Emily withdrew her hand. "I'm not confused, Evelyn. I've spent the last 18 hours reviewing financial records, private investigator reports, and correspondence between my father and James's father. The picture they paint is remarkably clear." "And what picture is that, exactly?" Evelyn asked, her tone dangerously pleasant. "A systematic campaign to separate me from my mother," Emily replied steadily. "To remake me into your version of a proper Montgomery wife, to use me to promote a fraudulent charity, to gradually replace Helen in my life until I actually stood up at my baby shower and publicly rejected her as my child's grandmother." Evelyn sighed dramatically. "You're overwrought, dear. Perhaps we should reschedule when you're feeling more balanced." "I've never been clearer," Emily countered, "and I've never been more certain about what happens next." The waiter approached to take our orders, but Evelyn waved him away with practiced authority. "We need a few more minutes." Once he'd retreated, she leaned forward, her voice dropping. "And what exactly happens next, in this little family drama you're constructing?" James answered, his lawyer's precision evident in each word. "A complete restructuring of the Montgomery Institute under new leadership, a public correction of Emily's statement, at the baby shower, and most importantly, the establishment of clear boundaries regarding your involvement in our family going forward, particularly with our child. The threat to her social masterpiece, the Institute, finally cracked Evelyn's composure. You can't restructure what isn't yours, James. The Institute is my creation, my legacy. The board voted yesterday, James replied calmly. Grandfather made the calls himself. The documentation has already been filed. Harold, Evelyn hissed, true emotion finally breaking through her polished veneer. I might have known he'd be involved in this little coup. He's resented me from the moment I married William. He's trying to protect his grandson and great-grandchild, I interjected quietly, speaking for the first time, just as Richard tried to protect Emily when he saw the pattern of your behavior 8 years ago. Evelyn's gaze swung to me, naked dislike finally visible in her eyes. Richard Carter was a second-rate mathematician who couldn't accept that his daughter had married above her station. He fabricated evidence because he resented the Montgomery connection, just as you do, Helen. I refused to take the bait, maintaining the calm demeanor I'd perfected through decades of teaching. Richard was nominated for the Fields Medal, Evelyn, hardly second-rate, and he recognized your tactics because he'd seen what you did to William and his friendships years earlier. Ancient history, Evelyn dismissed, though a flush had risen to her cheeks. Irrelevant to the current situation. On the contrary, Emily said, it established the pattern that continued with me. The same manipulation, the same isolation techniques, the same gradual replacement of authentic relationships with ones you controlled. Evelyn's eyes narrowed as she reassessed her position. We could almost see her calculating her remaining leverage, searching for the weakness in our united front. James, she said finally, her voice softening as she turned to her son. You can't seriously support this attack on your mother. After everything I've done for you, for Emily, the connections I've provided, the doors I've opened, your position at Montgomery Holdings exists because of my influence. My position exists because I'm a competent attorney, James corrected gently. And Emily's career thrived because of her own talents, not your social maneuvering. Evelyn changed tactics, her eyes suddenly glistening with practiced tears. I only wanted what was best for you both, for the Montgomery legacy to continue with the proper guidance. If I seemed overly involved, it was only out of love. It was a masterful performance. The wounded mother, the misunderstood matriarch, whose good intentions had been cruelly misinterpreted. I'd seen her deploy similar emotional manipulation with Emily many times over the years, usually to great effect, but Emily was no longer susceptible. Love doesn't manipulate, she said simply. Love doesn't isolate. Love doesn't attempt to replace a mother with a more socially advantageous version. What you feel isn't love, Evelyn. It's ownership. For a moment, genuine shock registered on Evelyn's face. Perhaps the first time in decades someone had so directly challenged her self-narrative. Then her expression hardened, calculation replacing the momentary vulnerability. I see Helen has thoroughly poisoned you against me, she said coldly. How disappointing that you've chosen this path, Emily, especially when your child deserves the advantages only the Montgomery name can properly provide. My child will have everything that matters, Emily replied, her hand finding mine under the table, including a grandmother who loves unconditionally, who teaches values rather than social climbing, who understands that worth isn't measured by address or connections. Evelyn's smile turned frigid. How charmingly naive. We'll see how long those lofty sentiments last when reality intrudes. She gathered her designer purse, preparing to make a strategic retreat. This conversation is clearly unproductive today. Perhaps once the pregnancy hormones have stabilized, you'll reconsider this unfortunate position. As she stood, she delivered her parting shot. The garden party is cancelled, of course. I'll inform the guests that Emily isn't feeling well enough to attend. Pregnancy complications. So concerning at her age. Her attempt to undermine Emily's planned public correction was transparent and futile. The garden party will proceed as scheduled, James informed her calmly. Grandfather has already confirmed with the caterers and staff. As the new chairman of the Institute, he's now the official host. For the first time, genuine fear flashed across Evelyn's perfect features. She had finally recognized the true extent of what she was losing. Not just her control over Emily and James, but her social centerpiece, her carefully curated public image, her entire carefully constructed kingdom. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her exit as precisely calculated as every other aspect of her public persona. Only the slight tremor in her hand as she adjusted her jacket betrayed her inner turmoil. "Round one," James murmured as we watched her disappear through the restaurant's discreet entrance. "She'll regroup and counterattack." "Let her," Emily said with quiet determination. "We have something she doesn't." "What's that?" I asked, still processing the confrontation we'd just navigated. Emily squeezed my hand, a genuine smile replacing the tension of the last hour. "The truth, and each other." The week between our confrontation with Evelyn and the Institute's annual garden party passed in a blur of preparation. James worked with Harold and Martin Green to finalize the Institute's restructuring, ensuring the legal framework was unassailable. Emily drafted her public statement, revising it countless times until every word perfectly balanced remorse for her baby shower declaration with firm boundaries for the future. I focused on supporting them both, while privately marveling at how quickly everything had changed. On the morning of the garden party, I stood before my bedroom mirror, studying my reflection with critical eyes. I'd chosen a simple blue dress that Richard had always loved, elegant enough for the occasion, without attempting to compete with Evelyn's designer wardrobe. My silver-streaked hair, which Evelyn had once suggested I really should color Helen to look less mature, was styled in a natural bob that framed my face rather than fighting the passage of time. "You look beautiful," Emily said from the doorway of my bedroom. She had insisted I spend the night at their home, wanting us to arrive at the Montgomery estate as a united family. "So do you," I replied truthfully. My daughter glowed in a flowing maternity dress that highlighted rather than concealed her 6-month pregnancy. The shadows that had haunted her eyes during the years of Evelyn's strongest influence had disappeared, replaced by a clear-eyed determination I recognized from her childhood. "Are you nervous?" she asked, perching on the edge of my bed. "Terrified," I admitted with a small smile. "I've avoided Evelyn's social gatherings for years. Walking into the lion's den voluntarily feels counterintuitive." "You won't be alone this time," Emily promised. "James and I will be right beside you. And Harold will be there too. Evelyn can't isolate you anymore." James appeared behind Emily, handsome in a tailored suit. "The car's ready whenever you are. Grandfather called. He's already at the estate, running interference with the caterers Mother tried to cancel." "Of course she did," Emily sighed. "Anything to sabotage today." "Harold Montgomery is not a man easily outmaneuvered," I observed, having developed considerable respect for James's grandfather over the past week, even by Evelyn. "He's been waiting decades for this opportunity," James agreed, "to finally see Mother's control challenged effectively. He won't let anything derail it now." As our car approached the Montgomery estate's imposing gates, I felt a flutter of anxiety. For 8 years, I had carefully avoided this territory, Evelyn's personal kingdom where every element was designed to showcase Montgomery prestige and her impeccable taste. "Remember the plan," James murmured as we drove up the circular drive. "We make a normal appearance, socialize appropriately, wait for Grandfather to make his opening remarks about the Institute's future, then Emily makes her statement." Emily squeezed my hand. "Just stay close. I won't let her isolate you this time." The garden was already filled with Boston's elite when we arrived. Old money in understated luxury, new money in designer labels, all mingling amid meticulously groomed topiary and imported roses. Heads turned as we entered, whispers following in our wake. My presence alongside Emily and James, just days after the baby shower incident, was clearly causing ripples. Harold spotted us immediately, making his way across the lawn with surprising agility for a man of his years. "You've arrived perfectly on time," he greeted us, the formal words belied by the warmth in his eyes. "Everything is in place." "Mother?" James asked quietly. "Maintaining a strategic distance for now," Harold replied. "She's by the East Fountain, surrounded by her most loyal allies. I believe she's attempting to preemptively control the narrative about today's announcements." "Let her try," Emily said with newfound confidence. "The truth speaks for itself." We moved through the gathering as a unit, accepting congratulations on Emily's pregnancy, deflecting questions about the rumored institute changes, maintaining a unified front that prevented Evelyn from isolating any of us. I caught glimpses of her across the garden, resplendent in pale blue silk, her social mask firmly in place as she held court among her supporters. Only someone watching closely would notice the tension in her smile, the calculated assessment in her eyes as she tracked our movements. At precisely noon, as scheduled, Harold ascended the garden's small stone terrace, commanding attention without needing to speak. The string quartet fell silent, conversations paused, and all eyes turned to the Montgomery patriarch. "Distinguished friends and supporters of the Montgomery Institute," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the manicured lawns. "Welcome to our annual celebration of educational opportunity and social responsibility." He launched into a carefully crafted speech about the Institute's accomplishments and future vision, subtly emphasizing transparency, accountability, and genuine charitable impact. The message was clear to anyone paying attention. Changes were coming to Evelyn's pet project. "As we look to the future," Harold continued, "I'm pleased to announce a new chapter in the Institute's leadership. My grandson James and his wife Emily will be assuming executive directorship, bringing fresh vision and energy to our mission." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I watched Evelyn across the garden, noting how her perfect hostess smile remained fixed while her knuckles whitened around her champagne flute. "Emily," Harold gestured graciously, "perhaps you'd like to say a few words about your vision for the Institute?" This was the moment we'd planned for. Emily's opportunity to publicly correct her baby shower declaration while simultaneously establishing her new role. I felt my heart racing as she moved forward, ascending the terrace steps with calm dignity, her pregnancy visible evidence of the next Montgomery generation she carried. "Thank you, Harold," she began, her voice steady despite what I knew must be considerable nerves. "The Montgomery Institute represents a profound opportunity to create meaningful educational access for young women who might otherwise be overlooked. As we move forward, we are committed to ensuring that every dollar donated translates directly into expanded opportunities and measurable outcomes." She paused, her gaze finding mine in the crowd. "Before I outline our specific plans, however, I need to address something personal. Many of you attended my baby shower last week, where I made a declaration that I now deeply regret." A ripple of tension moved through the gathering. Social Boston recognized the public correction of a faux pas when they saw one, and this promised to be spectacular. "I publicly dismissed my mother, Helen Carter, and claimed another would be the only true grandmother to my child," Emily continued, her voice clear and unwavering. "I spoke those words under influences I'm only beginning to understand, and they reflected neither my heart nor the truth." She extended her hand toward me. "Mom? Would you join me, please?" Every eye followed me as I moved forward, ascending the terrace steps to stand beside my daughter. Across the garden, I could see Evelyn's perfectly composed exterior remain intact, but I sensed the calculations racing behind her smile as her carefully orchestrated social triumph began to collapse in real time. "My mother raised me alone after my father died when I was 24, Emily continued, her voice carrying across the now silent garden. "She sacrificed her own dreams to ensure I could pursue mine. She supported my marriage to James, even when it meant watching me gradually pull away under new influences." Emily's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. "The Montgomery Institute does important work that will continue and expand under new leadership." She turned to look directly toward where Evelyn stood rigidly among her allies. "But no charitable foundation, no social position, no family name is more valuable than authentic relationship. Something my mother understood that I temporarily forgot." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's smile remained fixed, though her eyes had hardened to flints. "So today," Emily concluded, raising her glass of sparkling water, "I want to offer the toast I should have given at my shower. To Helen Carter, the woman who taught me that true love requires neither social status nor perfect appearances, only steadfast presence and unconditional acceptance. The woman who will be the most important grandmother my child could ask for." James raised his glass immediately. "To Helen Carter." Harold joined from his position near us. "To Helen Carter." One by one, glasses lifted throughout the garden, social momentum shifting as decisively as we had hoped. Even those who didn't understand the full context recognized the public correction of a previous slight, the restoration of a mother's position. I felt tears threatening, but held them back, unwilling to give Evelyn the satisfaction of seeing me overcome with emotion. Instead, I stood tall beside my daughter, accepting this public reclamation with the same quiet dignity I had maintained during years of subtle exclusion. James stepped forward next, his lawyer's precision evident in each carefully chosen word. While we have everyone's attention, Emily and I would like to share some exciting developments about the Montgomery Institute's future. As grandfather mentioned, we'll be implementing a comprehensive restructuring to enhance transparency and expand our impact. He outlined the changes: increased scholarship funding, independent financial oversight, expanded educational programming, without directly referencing the fraud we had uncovered. This was the compromise we had agreed upon: reform without public scandal, transformation without destroying the Montgomery name. As James spoke, I watched Evelyn across the garden. She stood absolutely still, a statue of perfect social composure, only the slight tremor in her champagne glass betraying her inner turmoil. Her carefully constructed kingdom was being reclaimed in full view of the very social circle she had spent decades cultivating. When the formal announcements concluded, the party resumed its superficial pleasantries, guests circulating with champagne flutes, the string quartet playing subdued classical music, conversations flowing around the bombshell that had just been dropped in their midst. Boston society would be processing and reprocessing today's events for months to come. Emily, James, and I maintained our united front as we accepted congratulations and fielded questions about the Institute's future. Harold remained close, his presence adding unmistakable Montgomery authority to the changing of the guard. "She's coming this way," James murmured, after about 20 minutes of strategic mingling. "Brace yourselves." I turned to see Evelyn approaching, her social mask firmly in place, though I could detect the effort it required to maintain her composure. She had retreated, regrouped, and was now mounting her counter-offensive, in full view of her social peers, where certain boundaries of decorum would have to be maintained. "Emily, darling," she greeted, her voice honey over steel. Such a passionate speech, though perhaps more emotional than the occasion warranted. She turned to me with practiced graciousness. "Helen, how lovely to see you taking such an active interest in the Institute. Though the operations can be quite complex for someone without background in philanthropic management." The subtle barbs were classic Evelyn, the implication that Emily was being over-emotional, that I was out of my depth in her world. But where once these jabs might have landed painfully, now they simply revealed the transparent tactics they had always been. "Thank you for your concern, Evelyn," I replied with matching politeness. Fortunately, my background in educational administration translates quite well to scholarship program development. I'm looking forward to bringing that expertise to the Institute's new direction. Her perfect smile faltered momentarily. "You're joining the Institute leadership? How unexpected." "Mom will be heading our new scholarship selection committee," Emily confirmed, "ensuring that recipients are chosen based on genuine merit and need rather than other considerations." The implication that previous scholarships might have been awarded based on social connections or family influence hung in the air between us. "I see," Evelyn said, her voice cooling several degrees. "A complete Montgomery restructuring, then. How fortunate the family has been so thoroughly infiltrated." James stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "That's enough, Mother. This is neither the time nor place for this conversation." "On the contrary," Evelyn replied, her public smile remaining in place, though her eyes glittered dangerously. "What better place to discuss the Montgomery legacy than among those who have supported it for generations? I wonder how they feel about watching outsiders claim what they haven't built." "Helen Carter is hardly an outsider," Harold's voice interrupted as he joined our circle. "She's the mother of your grandchild, Evelyn, the widow of Richard Carter, who was William's closest friend before you systematically isolated him from everyone who didn't serve your social climbing agenda." A collective inhale from nearby guests confirmed that we now had an audience for this confrontation. Evelyn registered this fact instantly, her tactical mind recalibrating. "Ancient history, Harold," she dismissed with forced lightness, "and hardly relevant to current Institute governance." "On the contrary," he countered, "the pattern established then continues now. Your attempt to separate Emily from her mother, to control the Montgomery narrative, to ensure that only your version of events is permitted. The difference is that this time you've failed." The naked challenge, delivered by her father-in-law, a Montgomery by blood, in front of Boston's elite, struck Evelyn like a physical blow. For a moment, her perfect mask slipped, revealing the cold fury beneath. "You've always resented me," she hissed, momentarily forgetting her audience. "Always undermined my position in this family." I've waited, Harold corrected calmly. Watched you manipulate my son until he was a shadow of himself. Observed as you attempted the same with my grandson. Documented your financial mismanagement of the Institute. And now, finally, acted to protect what remains of the Montgomery legacy from your corrupting influence. The confrontation had now drawn a substantial crowd, discreet but attentive witnesses to Evelyn's public dethroning. She registered this fact with the instincts of a lifetime socialite, instantly recalibrating her approach. How melodramatic you've become with age, Harold, she laughed lightly, attempting to dismiss his accusations. Anyone would think you were describing some villain from a Victorian novel rather than a devoted mother concerned about her family's welfare. But her usual tactics, deflection, dismissal, social judo, were failing her for perhaps the first time. The witnesses had already seen Emily's public reclamation of me as her mother. They had heard the announcement of the Institute's restructuring away from Evelyn's control. The unified front of Harold, James, Emily, and myself presented a challenge she couldn't easily dismiss. The Montgomerys have spoken quite clearly today, Harold said, his aristocratic bearing giving his words additional weight. The future of this family and its charitable endeavors now rests with the next generation, and with the values Helen Carter has instilled in her daughter. It was a masterful coup de grace, positioning me not as an outsider infiltrating the Montgomery dynasty, but as the moral foundation upon which its future would be built. Evelyn understood the implications immediately, her gaze hardening as she recognized her comprehensive defeat. "If you'll excuse me," she said with ice-cold dignity, "I have guests to attend to." As she walked away, her back ramrod straight and her social smile firmly in place, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction at seeing justice served, sadness for the relationships poisoned by her manipulations, and a strange sort of pity for a woman so consumed by social status that she had sacrificed authentic connection on its altar. "She'll regroup," James murmured, watching his mother disappear among the party guests. "This isn't over." "No," Harold agreed. "But today's battle has been decisively won. The social narrative has shifted. The legal changes are in place. The Montgomery Institute is beyond her control now." Emily slipped her arm through mine, a public gesture of connection that would be noted and reported throughout Boston society. And most importantly, our family bonds are restored. That's what matters most, for us and for the baby. As the afternoon progressed, I observed the subtle social realignment taking place around us. Guests who had previously gravitated exclusively to Evelyn now made points of speaking with Emily, James, and even me. Harold's open support of our faction carried significant weight in this stratified social ecosystem. By the time we prepared to leave, the transformation was complete. What had begun as Evelyn's garden party had become the public unveiling of the Montgomery family's new chapter, one in which Emily and James held the reins. Harold provided the family authority, and I, Helen Carter, had been fully acknowledged as an essential part of the dynasty's future. "Grandmother," Emily said as we walked to the car, one hand resting on her pregnant belly, "I think your grandson is going to have a very different relationship with the Montgomery legacy than anyone expected." "A better one," I replied, covering her hand with mine. "Built on truth rather than appearances, on love rather than social calculation." As our car pulled away from the Montgomery estate, I glanced back to see Evelyn watching from an upstairs window, a solitary figure already fading from the center of the world she had so carefully constructed. 3 months after the garden party, I stood at the edge of Lake Champlain, watching as construction crews put the finishing touches on the twin lakeside cottages. The Vermont property that Richard and William had purchased 30 years ago had transformed from an architect's rendering to physical reality with remarkable speed, a testament to James's efficiency and the resources now available through the trust fund William had established. Autumn painted the surrounding forests in brilliant gold and crimson, a perfect backdrop for the natural wood and stone of the cottages. They stood side by side, connected by a shared garden that would bloom in the spring, 2 distinct homes with a carefully designed space of connection between them. "Much like our families," I thought with a smile. "Penny for your thoughts?" Emily asked, joining me at the water's edge. At 9 months pregnant, she moved carefully, one hand supporting her lower back. "Just admiring what Richard and William started and we finished," I replied, putting an arm around her shoulders. "They would have loved seeing this." Dad would have immediately started calculating the optimal angle for stargazing from the deck, Emily agreed with a wistful smile, and plotting where to put his telescope. I've already designated a space for it in your cottage, James called from the deck he was helping to stain. Southeastern corner, perfect elevation above the tree line. In the months since the garden party confrontation, our lives had shifted dramatically. James had taken a sabbatical from his law practice to oversee the Institute's restructuring and the Vermont property development. Emily had resigned from her PR firm, choosing to focus on her pregnancy and her new role as the Institute's executive director, a position she could largely manage remotely from our Vermont sanctuary. I had retired from teaching, closing the chapter on a 30-year career to begin this new phase of life. Evelyn, meanwhile, had retreated to the Montgomery's Palm Beach estate, maintaining a strategic distance from Boston society while she licked her wounds. Her occasional text messages to James were models of restraint, polite inquiries about the pregnancy, careful avoidance of Institute matters, no mention of me or the garden party confrontation. She was biding her time, we all knew, but for now, an uneasy truce prevailed. The nursery furniture arrived, Emily mentioned, linking her arm through mine as we walked slowly back toward the cottages. Mom, it's perfect. Exactly like the set you found in that antique shop. James's grandfather insisted on having it restored and delivered as his gift to the baby. Harold Montgomery had become an unexpected ally and friend over these past months. His pride in James's independence and his genuine interest in connecting with Emily had created a bridge between our families that transcended Evelyn's machinations. Have you decided on names yet? I asked, a question I'd been carefully avoiding for weeks, not wanting to pressure them. Emily exchanged a meaningful glance with James before answering. Actually, yes. If it's a boy, Richard William Montgomery. If a girl, Helen Grace. I stopped walking, momentarily overcome. Helen? Really? Of course, Emily said simply. Named after the grandmother who never gave up on me, even when I was at my worst. My eyes filled with tears. I'd be honored, though I'm not sure how Evelyn will feel about a granddaughter named after me rather than her. James joined us, wiping stain from his hands with a rag. Mother's feelings stopped being our primary concern the day she orchestrated that baby shower toast. She'll adapt or she won't. But our child's name is our decision, not hers. His newfound firmness regarding Evelyn was perhaps the most significant change these months had brought. The dutiful son had been replaced by a man who understood boundaries, who recognized manipulation, who prioritized his wife and coming child over his mother's approval. Besides, Emily added with a mischievous smile, Helen Grace Montgomery has a much better ring than Evelyn Constance. We all laughed, the sound echoing across the quiet lake. These moments of simple joy had become more frequent as the weight of Evelyn's influence had lifted from our lives. Emily laughed more freely now, her natural warmth no longer constrained by Evelyn's expectations of proper Montgomery behavior. James had discovered a talent for woodworking, creating handcrafted furniture for the cottages with none of the self-consciousness he might once have felt about such an unsuitably rustic hobby. As for me, I had begun writing again, something I'd loved in college but abandoned during the busy years of teaching and single motherhood. Nothing profound, just reflections on life and family, observations of the changing seasons on the lake. But the act of putting words to paper felt like reclaiming yet another piece of myself that had been set aside for too long. Dinner's almost ready, Harold called from my cottage's porch, where he'd been supervising the catered meal delivered for our weekend gathering. At 82, he had found new purpose in helping guide the Institute's transition and in forging the grandfather relationship with Emily that William had never lived to enjoy. As we made our way up from the lakefront, I marveled at how much had changed in just 6 months. From the devastating baby shower toast to this peaceful evening in Vermont, the journey had been both painful and healing. I still can't quite believe this is our life now, Emily said, seeming to read my thoughts as she often did. That awful day at the shower seems like another lifetime. In many ways it was, I replied. The end of one chapter and the beginning of another. A better one, James added, helping Emily navigate the stone path to the cottage, built on truth rather than appearances. We gathered for dinner in my cottage's great room, with its soaring windows overlooking the lake. Harold had arranged a modest celebration of our first official weekend in the completed cottages. Champagne, sparkling cider for Emily, a meal from James's favorite Boston restaurant, and small, thoughtful gifts for each of us to mark the occasion. To new beginnings, Harold proposed, raising his glass, and to the legacy Richard and William envisioned all those years ago, a legacy of genuine connection that even Evelyn couldn't permanently sever. We clinked glasses, the simple toast carrying layers of meaning for each of us. For James, it represented freedom from his mother's manipulations. For Emily, reconciliation with her authentic self after years of Evelyn's influence. For Harold, redemption for his failure to protect William. And for me, the restoration of the relationship I had nearly lost to Evelyn's calculated interference. As we enjoyed our meal, conversation flowed easily. Plans for the baby's imminent arrival, the garden we would plant in the shared space between the cottages, Harold's ideas for expanding the Institute's scholarship program to include women returning to education after motherhood. No tension, no calculation, no need to guard our words or manage impressions. Just family, in its most genuine form. After dinner, as darkness fell across the lake, Emily suddenly gasped, one hand flying to her belly. "The baby?" James asked, immediately alert. "Just kicking," she assured him, really enthusiastically. "Here, feel." She guided his hand to her stomach, then mine, then Harold's. We all felt it, the strong, decisive movements of new life, the next generation who would inherit the legacy we were reclaiming and rebuilding. "Definitely has the Montgomery determination," Harold observed with a proud smile. "And the Carter intelligence," I added, sharing a warm glance with Emily. "Plus, excellent timing," James noted, checking his watch. "Exactly on schedule according to the latest app calculations." We laughed at his precision, the sound of our mingled joy carrying across the quiet lake, just as I imagined Richard and William had once envisioned when they purchased this peaceful property decades ago. Later that night, after Emily and James had retired to their cottage and Harold to the guest room in mine, I stood on my porch alone, watching moonlight silver the gentle waves. The air held the crisp promise of winter, but the cottages were warm, secure, ready for whatever weather might come. My phone buzzed with a text message from Emily. "Can't sleep. Too excited about everything. Love you, Mom. Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." I typed back, "Some bonds can't be broken, only temporarily obscured. Sleep well, my love. Tomorrow is a new day in our new beginning." As I prepared for bed in my new home, I paused before a photograph I'd placed on my bedside table. Richard on our wedding day, his eyes bright with the future he imagined for us. "You were right," I whispered to his image. "The truth did set us free, even if it took longer than you hoped." The next morning, I woke to urgent knocking at my door. James stood there, his hair disheveled, his expression a mixture of panic and joy. Emily's water broke. The baby's coming. What followed was a carefully orchestrated chaos. The drive to the Burlington hospital we had selected months ago, calls to doctors and family, the beginning of the long wait for new life to arrive. 16 hours later, as the Vermont sunset painted the hospital room in golden light, Helen Grace Montgomery entered the world with a powerful cry that seemed to announce her determination to be heard. As I held my granddaughter for the first time, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine with surprising strength, I saw in her perfect face echoes of all who had contributed to her existence. Emily's chin, James's eyes, hints of Richard in the shape of her brow, traces of the Montgomery line in her determined expression. But most importantly, I saw the future, a life untethered from Evelyn's manipulations, a family rebuilt on foundations of truth and genuine connection, a legacy redeemed from the patterns of the past. "Welcome, Helen Grace," I whispered to my namesake. "Your story begins now, and what a different story it will be." Golden autumn light filtered through the maple trees surrounding the lake, casting dappled shadows on the annual picnic spread across the shared gardens between the twin cottages. I adjusted my sun hat, watching 5-year-old Helen Grace chase her 3-year-old brother Richie around the oak tree at the water's edge, their laughter carrying across the clear Vermont air. "Careful by the water," Emily called from where she arranged desserts on the long wooden table James had crafted himself 3 summers ago. "I've got them, Mom," James assured her, already moving toward the children with the watchful attention that had characterized his fatherhood from the start. So much had changed in 5 years, yet this place, the sanctuary William and Richard had envisioned decades ago, remained the constant center of our expanding family life. We still maintained our respective homes in Boston, where Emily now ran the fully transformed Montgomery Institute and James had established his own law practice focused on nonprofit governance. But the lakeside cottages had become our true north, the place where we gathered for holidays, summer vacations, and our now traditional autumn weekend celebrating Helen Grace's birthday. "More lemonade, Helen?" Harold asked, from his customary chair on my cottage porch. At 87, he moved more slowly now, relying on a cane and the occasional steadying hand, but his mind remained sharp as ever. He had become a beloved fixture in our family constellation, grand herald to the children, trusted advisor to James and Emily, and, somewhat to my surprise, a dear friend to me. "Thank you," I replied, settling into the chair beside him. "The party seems to be a success." "Indeed," he agreed, his eyes twinkling as he watched the children. "Though I believe the guest of honor is more interested in frogs than birthday cake at the moment." Helen Grace, named for me but already her own indomitable person, had indeed discovered something fascinating at the lake's edge, her dark curls bent close to the water as James supervised her exploration. She had inherited Emily's curiosity and James's methodical nature, combined with a fierce independence that reminded me often of Richard. "Some things never change," Emily observed, joining us on the porch. "I was exactly the same at her age, always more interested in creatures than sweets." "You still ruined countless dresses wading into ponds," I confirmed with a smile. "Richard used to say you were part water nymph." These casual references to Richard had become easier over time. The sharp edge of loss had softened, allowing us to incorporate his memory naturally into our family narrative. He existed in Helen Grace's serious concentration when tackling a puzzle, in Richie's infectious laugh, in the quiet moments when Emily and I recognized some gesture or expression that unmistakably echoed her father. The sound of car tires on the gravel driveway interrupted our reminiscing. Emily's expression tightened slightly, a reaction so subtle anyone who didn't know her well would have missed it entirely. "Right on time," Harold noted, checking his watch. "Precisely 3 o'clock. The silver Mercedes that pulled up beside our more modest vehicles gleamed in the afternoon sun, its pristine condition a stark contrast to our SUVs, with their cheerful clutter of children's toys and weekend bags. The driver's door opened, and Evelyn Montgomery emerged, elegant as always in a cashmere sweater and tailored slacks, a wrapped gift tucked under one arm. "Grandmother Evelyn is here," Emily called to James, her voice pleasant, but lacking the natural warmth it held when she spoke to me or Harold. 5 years had brought an uneasy peace between Evelyn and our family. After Helen Grace's birth, she had maintained her dignified distance for nearly 8 months, sending expensive gifts but declining invitations to meet her first grandchild. Only when Richie was born did she finally request a reconciliation meeting, orchestrated with the careful diplomatic skills Harold had honed over decades of corporate negotiation. The terms were never explicitly stated, but understood by all. Evelyn would accept her diminished role in family governance. She would respect James and Emily's parenting decisions without interference. Most importantly, she would acknowledge my position as the children's primary grandmother, without attempting to undermine my relationship with them. In return, she would be permitted limited, supervised access to her grandchildren. She would retain her title as founding director emeritus of the Institute. She would not be publicly humiliated by exposure of the financial improprieties we had discovered. "Grandmother Evelyn!" Helen Grace called, abandoning her frog expedition to race up from the lakeside, Richie toddling behind her. Her genuine enthusiasm for her paternal grandmother, unshadowed by adult complexities, was one of the purest gifts childhood offered. Evelyn's composed features softened visibly at the sight of the children. Whatever her flaws, whatever manipulations she had orchestrated over the years, her affection for these grandchildren appeared genuine. She knelt carefully, mindful of her designer clothing, but willing to risk it for Helen Grace's enthusiastic embrace. "Happy birthday, my darling," she said, presenting the meticulously wrapped package. 5 years old. Such a milestone. "Thank you." Helen Grace accepted the gift with the good manners Emily and James had instilled. "Will you have cake with us? Mom made my favorite, chocolate with raspberry filling." "That sounds lovely," Evelyn replied, rising to greet the adults with practiced social grace. "Helen, Harold, Emily, James, thank you for including me today." The formality in her tone when addressing me, subtle but unmistakable, had never fully disappeared, despite 5 years of negotiated coexistence. I responded with the calm courtesy I had perfected through decades of teaching. "We're glad you could make it, Evelyn. Helen Grace has been looking forward to seeing you." As we returned to the picnic table for cake and presents, I observed the careful dance our family had perfected over these years. James maintained a polite but emotional distance from his mother, engaging her in conversation about neutral topics while never allowing her prolonged, unsupervised access to the children. Emily was gracious but watchful, quick to redirect any conversation that strayed toward Evelyn's subtle criticisms or attempts to exert influence. Harold, interestingly, had become the most effective buffer between Evelyn and the rest of us, his status as Montgomery patriarch giving him an authority she couldn't easily challenge, his long history with her providing insight into her tactical approaches before they fully materialized. "A beautiful party," Evelyn commented as Emily served cake, though perhaps next year Helen Grace might enjoy something more elaborate. The Montgomery Foundation's annual children's benefit falls near her birthday. We could combine the celebrations, introduce her to some suitable playmates from Brookline and Beacon Hill, and there it was, the gentle opening gambit in Evelyn's never entirely abandoned campaign to shape her grandchildren in her image of Montgomery propriety. "Helen Grace has already chosen next year's theme," I interjected smoothly. "Astronomy. Like her grandfather Richard, she's becoming quite fascinated with the stars. We're planning to set up telescopes right here by the lake," James added, reinforcing the boundary with calm firmness. Her school friends from Boston are already excited about the sleepover. Evelyn's smile remained fixed, though a flicker of calculation crossed her features before she gracefully retreated. "How educational. Richard would certainly approve." As Helen Grace opened her gifts, books from me, a junior microscope from Harold, a custom dollhouse for her frog collection from her parents, and a probably inappropriately expensive junior equestrian outfit from Evelyn, I reflected on how far we had all come. The baby shower toast that had once shattered my heart now existed as merely the catalyst for our family's transformation. Emily had blossomed into a confident mother and respected nonprofit leader, no longer seeking Evelyn's approval or measuring herself against impossible standards of Montgomery perfection. James had established his independence from his mother's influence while maintaining a relationship that allowed his children the benefit of knowing their grandmother, albeit within carefully established boundaries. And I had discovered a chapter of life I never anticipated, split between my cozy cottage in Vermont and my apartment in Boston, dividing my time between assisting Emily at the Institute, writing the memoir I'd finally found courage to pursue, and being the involved grandmother I had always hoped to become. Later, after Evelyn had departed with precise timing, never overstaying her carefully allocated visits, and the children were tucked into bed with birthday excitement still brightening their eyes, the adults gathered on my cottage porch to watch the sunset paint the lake in brilliant orange and gold. "Another successful negotiation of the Evelyn dynamics," James observed, handing glasses of wine to Harold and me, while Emily curled beside him on the porch swing. "She's mellowing," Harold noted. That comment about the Montgomery benefit was her only attempt at interference today, a record low. "Or she's becoming more selective about her battles," Emily suggested, biding her time until the children are older and potentially more susceptible to her influence. "Either way," I said, "we'll be here to maintain the boundaries that keep this family healthy, together." As darkness settled over the lake and the first stars appeared above the mountains, I felt a profound sense of peace. The world Richard and William had envisioned decades ago when they purchased this property had finally come into being, not perfectly, not without complications, but with authentic love at its center rather than social calculation. When Emily and James eventually returned to their cottage with sleeping children transferred carefully to waiting beds, Harold lingered on my porch, contemplative in the moonlight. "You know," he said finally, "William and Richard would be proud of what we've built here, not just the cottages, but the family, the legacy of truth they hoped for." "I think so too," I agreed, though I doubt even they could have imagined exactly how it would unfold. Harold smiled, his weathered face peaceful in the soft light. "The best legacies are living things, Helen. They grow in directions we can't always predict, shaped by each generation's choices. All we can do is plant the seeds in good soil and trust in what blooms." As I prepared for bed that night, I paused before the photographs that lined my bedroom wall. Richard on our wedding day, Emily as a determined toddler, James and Emily, with newborn Helen Grace, all four grandparents gathered around baby Richie, our growing family at last summer's lakeside reunion. We did it, Richard, I whispered to the husband I had loved and lost so many years ago. Not perfectly, not without pain, but we found our way to the truth you always valued above all else. And in the gentle Vermont darkness, surrounded by the family we had built and rebuilt against all odds, that truth felt like the most precious legacy of all.